Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive!
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space, and another one of our bonus episodes. Between seasons, we're just giving you some extra content. We're dipping back into the archives and giving you something a little bit special. I'm Scott Weatherly, you're one of your regular hosts, and as usual, I'm joined by Julian. Julian, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited that we get to have all these episodes without really having to do any work.
Yes, yeah, the double dipping effect is fantastic, and I'm all for repurposing things. And this one in particular actually had a very small audience, which was tragic in its own right, to be perfectly honest. This is for Flash Gordon, the 1980 Flash Gordon, the Queen soundtrack and all. And
Flash,
yeah. Every time, how often I say, Gordon's alive. Yes, and there are quotes throughout this review, but this was done for Patreon some time ago when I had a Patreon for 20th Century Geek, and I had a single Patreon, so it seems like only proper that more people get to listen to this review.
I'm especially excited about it because you and I. This is a perfect example of why it's good to let listeners get this again, or in this case, for the first time, because you and I reference Flash Gordon in like every other episode of Stories Out of Time and Space.
Yeah, it's clearly an important film to the pair of us. I think it's to actually address it as well. It's such a keystone of like 20th century sort of sci-fi pop culture as well. So we have to cover it. As I say, it's a previous one from a former recording, so the recording quality is probably not as good as this, but no, it's a great review, and I actually think it is a really good. I won't say it's one of our better ones, but it's a really good discussion actually. So,
so just deal with that recording quality, people. Suck it up.
That's it. It's just, that's it. Just take the hit for this one, but for now. That's it. Jump in the rocket ship and travel to Mongo for Julian and I to discuss Flash Gordon. So what we'll start with is a quick. We'll start with a quick recap of the plot because we are just discussing one film really. So I'll start with a summary of the film. It's pretty much off the cuff. So the film. I'm trying to think where to start. Well, the film starts with Flash Gordon and Dale Arden meeting on a plane. We learn that Flash Gordon's a known quarterback football player. Dale Arden, I think, is a holiday rep or a something like that. While in the midst of taking off, the Earth is attacked by Ming the Merciless, which causes all kinds of catastrophic geological and weather events. And their plane crash lands into Dr. Hans Zarkov's greenhouse laboratory. He forces them aboard a shuttle spaceship that, upon taking off, is pulled into the Imperial Vortex and allowed to land. And they land whilst unconscious but safe on Mongo, the Imperial homeworld of Ming the Merciless. From there, they are taken prisoner, presented to Ming, and to cut a long story short, Flash Gordon saves the day, defeats Ming, and I think we need to talk about some of the campy clothes involved. So we will get stuck into it. So what's this released in 1980? So it's been around for a while. So I'm not going to be too worried about spoilers, and it's also incredibly straightforward. So there are very few spoilers. With it being around for quite a while, what was your first exposure to Flash Gordon, the film?
It was probably the Queen soundtrack. I think I was about 4. I turned 4 in 1980, so I did not see this in theaters, and I don't really remember it playing on the telly, but I do remember hearing the Queen soundtrack, and then at some point watching Flash Gordon and sort of having no idea what to make of it. And I think it wasn't until later when I was in college that I saw it and, could appreciate it at all. I think as a kid, it was just, too campy for me. I didn't really understand the tone. Didn't make sense to me at the time. What about you?
No, I think that's you're very nail on the head really. The same with me. It's one of those where I think during the 80s, the Queen soundtrack, and especially just the Flash Gordon, the song Flash, was incredibly prevalent on every 80s party album. And I think every kids party I went to played it. So it was in my pop culture environment. I think as a kid, I don't remember knowing what it was from. I just thought it was some cool song I really enjoyed. And I don't think it was until I was in secondary school, so probably my sort of mid-teens, early to mid-teens, I think, I remember seeing it on Channel 4 one evening, and I remember seeing it on advertising, thinking, and hearing the song over the advert and thinking, right, that's what it's for. And like yourself, watching it and thinking, I don't know what this is. Really, I think we're thinking at the time, not entirely sure, the context of this film. I think in the being a teenager in the 90s and having sort of heavy metal and grunge as my sort of baseline, to then be introduced to this camp sci-fi romp saga, I don't know, was a bit jarring, I think would probably be the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and I think that it even colored my impressions of Queen overall. That Queen was always something that I appreciated musically, but it was odd. I remember when Bohemian Rhapsody was in Wayne's World, and it was just kind of well, this is catchy, but why is everybody so in love with this? Is this some in-joke that I just don't get?
Yeah.
And I think, so I think it kind of colored my impressions of Queen as thinking of Queen as you can't deny the musical talent of Freddie Mercury, but at the same time, it just seemed a little off. I wasn't sure how to take it, how serious it was. Yeah,
it's an odd one, because I actually listened to, whilst I was doing the garden this morning, I listened to the entire score all the way through. And there's very little, like you said, Freddie Mercury's got a fantastic voice, really, powerful. But there's very little Freddie Mercury in this. It is a score, and so it's the rest of the band stepping up. But actually stepping aside from the film and just listening to the music, it's a really quite interesting combination. There's elements that's quite, I might say it's complex, but it's pitch perfect for the film.
Oh, for sure.
They seem to get what it is they were doing.
It's a great match. And it's really, to a great extent, that match that makes it, so stand out. I think that title sequence, while a little dated with some of the same Alex Raymond art, repeated and repeated and repeated, still a great title sequence. And I think it kind of sets Flash Gordon away from, or apart from, sort of other kind of failed or forgotten 1980s, even early 90s, that whole era of, pop culture and superhero kind of movies where, a lot of stuff like, The Rocketeer, there were several others that just were more based on original properties, but have just kind of disappeared. And Flash Gordon has survived.
Yeah, and I know what you mean. I totally agree, because that period, from about 1980 to 1995, there was this repetitive attempt to keep bringing certain like copyright-free heroes, like those sort of characters into the movies, and you have. Like say, Flash Gordon really stands apart, and other films that sort of follow that track. I think Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy, whilst not a great film, again I applaud it because it takes a real stylistic stance. It really tries to emulate a comic, with its colours and its tone and that sort of thing. And then you get the more bland ones like the Phantom, the Rocketeer. I quite enjoy the Rocketeer, but the Rocketeer, the Shadow. And they all do just sort of like they fall into that sort of. There was a reason that they just didn't quite move, and so I think when they made the Flash, I think they made some very brave choices.
Well, I'm a huge fan of the Warren Beatty, Dick Tracy, and there again you have the soundtrack stands out. I mean, there's a great Madonna album tied to it. And even though Madonna doesn't have the cachet now that she did then, it was kind of like there was the Danny Elfman soundtrack and the or score and the Madonna soundtrack the same way they had done a Prince album plus a Danny Elfman score for Batman.
Yeah.
And so there again, music kind of helped set those two. Besides, both of them are so visually unique. Apart from some of those others.
Oh, and that's what I mean. I think, and maybe, I think we'll have to save Dick Tracy and do a review in the future, because I do think that's an underrated film and needs revisiting.
Oh yeah,
because it is. I think even the cast. Just gonna say, like, you got Warren Beatty, granted you got Madonna, but you've still got like Al Pacino.
Yeah.
It's got some really like. It is when you sort of, especially when you see Al Pacino in it, you do sort of go, I'm curious as to what his agent told him this was going to be. But yeah, maybe.
It's kind of the beginning of the decline of Pacino. I mean, he's still got like I Guess Scent of a Woman is a little after that, and Devil's Advocate, but it's kind of the early indications that sort of 70s Pacino is come and gone.
Yeah. It's the time.
But, even.
No, go on.
Well, I was just going to talk about Flash Gordon.
Go.
I remember being confused as a kid because the Alex Raymond comics weren't readily available to me. I mean, I had, there weren't really a lot of graphic novels. I mean, I was picking up the early graphic novels, by the mid to late 80s, but there weren't a lot available. And, back then you had to track down back issues, and Flash Gordon was like a character who I saw in ads in comics, but I never read comics about Flash Gordon. And I would see, like, art, and I knew Alex Raymond was a big deal, but I didn't really understand what Flash Gordon was. It didn't really fit into my kind of, like, pop culture universe yet.
Yeah.
And I even remember as a kid thinking, like, what is his relationship to DC's Flash? Like,
yeah. No, I agree.
That didn't make sense to me.
No, I agree. It's weird. I think, again, when I think back to when I watched, by the time I watched it, as you say, I hadn't had exposure to the comics, especially in Britain. Even now they're quite hard. There's a couple of like archive editions, and they've done that sort of thing you can get hold of, but it's not. They're quite expensive. They're not. They're not. I wouldn't say readily available. But the thing, there's a cartoon that I remember from the sort of late 80s, early 90s during that fight. It was called Defenders of the Earth, and it was Flash Gordon, the Phantom, Mandrake, the Magician, and their kids. And so, like, there was obviously, like, Flash Gordon was in that, but it's an older Flash Gordon. He's got kids, and it completely unrelated to this film. So again, I remember watching that and then watching this and thinking, yeah, I have no idea how these two relate. I don't know what this is. And so, like I say, knowing the context of this film, as well, especially the era, so coming, in 1980, is an interesting time for it as well, because it's post Star Wars. People are clamoring for more space and sci-fi stuff, but this is, I would say, more Barbarella than Star Wars.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a lot in preparation for this podcast, and thinking, a lot of the times in retrospect, you think, what the hell were they thinking? And don't get me wrong, I love Barbarella. I think Barbarella is amazing. Mm-hmm. But, post Star Wars, you have, so many attempts to cash in on that. And, so often they failed and were stupid. But, this goes in such a different direction. And there's no way that I can imagine somebody thought, oh yeah, that Star Wars crowd is going to like a super campy movie about a football player,
Yeah.
Who's so obviously like Lucas the Geek. That's another thing that sticks out to me is that, I love planetary fiction, right? I love like Adam Strange. I love, I love these stories, the kind of like, 50s sci-fi romance absurdity of it.
Yeah.
These planets can never get their act together until the manly man from Earth shows up, oh man. And that definitely fits into some sort of imperialist themes of, the white savior that we've talked about. I don't know what they were thinking with making it so campy, and apparently there was some. I haven't been able to find a whole lot on the production, but apparently there was some sort of discussion of them not caring enough about the script, and the script was being rewritten, and nobody really cared. Dino De Laurentiis didn't really care, if Flash was likable or if he had any personality. And it strikes me as so odd.
It does. Well, this is so. I did some digging, and in some of the material I've got on the edition I've got, they've got these little notes, and I did some stuff online, and about halfway through production, a lot of people seem to be saying, and Brian Blessed seemed to echo this on an interview I saw with him. Dino De Laurentiis completely just sort of like cut ties with this production. Like, he was obviously still doing it, but he was a bit like, whatever's going to happen. Like, it's. I think he was in that phase, like there was other things going on. He was just like, it's doing it. Like, let it do its thing. But the more I looked into it, you say about the script. The amount of stuff in this that has been ad-libbed is incredible. There's moments where you sort of go, oh, that's a great bit. That's a really good line. Oh, that was ad-libbed. Oh, that's a really good reaction. That was really well directed. No, that was ad-libbed. And it's just sort of like, oh, right, so this was chaos. And it's all luck that it just fell into place. And that seemed to be like Brian Blessed at one point in this interview. So he described it as pleasant pandemonium. And it sounds like he was just having the time of his life, and just sort of, I can imagine, I think it really shows on his performance that he had clearly just, like, he thinks this is hilarious, and he's just going to keep going and being himself, really, I think, more than anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're right.
I think another thing that stopped me from sort of identifying with it is, it seems so strange that, obviously, like, Luke Skywalker is such an outsider. Superman was a big success after that. That was kind of sci-fi. He's such an outsider. We're so used to, our heroes being geeky and nerdy, and here's this jock who, like, has no interior space whatsoever except swagger and confidence.
Well, this is it. I've got one of my notes here that that I've written about halfway through, and I've just put, is this a parody or not? Like, I don't know, because at the start he's like, he's a dumb jock, like you say, and he has no real right to be the hero of this. But I'm like, are they actually making some satirical point about America's place in things? I don't know. Am I reading too much into this? And then it's sort of like he becomes the hero, because of the way it's portrayed, and the the music and everything, like, you do get behind him, and I'm really enjoying the adventure of it all. That I sort of forget, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's not a parody, maybe it's just a simple adventure, and I'm reading too much into it. But it's there, I think, to be read into.
Oh yeah. Well, it definitely straddles that line. I mean, at the very least, it doesn't take itself seriously.
No.
I mean, rewatching it, it actually opens with. I had completely forgotten that it opens with Ming, using his, sort of like Cobra-style weather dominator to, cause earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and and I'm thinking, like, is this like a climate change denial thing? Like, there's a thing, the Merciless out there, like, heating up the planet.
That's it.
This is so bizarre.
Ming the Merciless, played by Al Gore.
Oh yeah.
But do you know what? You say that the opening has got one of the. They say about a parody when there's a bit where they talk about all this stuff, and they say the inhabitants call it Earth, and he's never heard of it before. Later on, there's a control panel about all the things he's doing to the planet, and one of them says earthquake.
Right.
So they've named it later at some point. There's stuff like that you think, yeah, but
well, yeah. I mean, there's no attempt to really make sense or be very realistic. And I mean, I even think when the wingmen spell out thanks at the end, there are those weird moments where you think, like, oh, they clearly know English.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. They've been listening to English this whole time.
Yeah, it's the universal language across all dimensions.
That's true. Yeah, there's no TARDIS explanation. It's just, the cosmos speaks English, right?
That's it. It's the simplest. Well, I'm British. I am English, so of course it does.
Yes.
It dates back to the Victorian era when we conquered everything. Is the simple answer.
Well, as they say, the sun's never set on the British Empire.
Yeah. There is the other thing. You talk about sort of the suns and stuff. One thing I noticed in this version, actually, that I was initially raised was I felt like there was a Wizard of Oz element to this film as well. The whole start of this film is set that you have the airport and the plane, and then Dr. Zarkov's laboratory. All of it is very muted. Like, they're all wearing browns or sort of like white and very muted sort of colours. They then get onto the rocket ship, they're knocked unconscious, and when they wake up in one of the most colourful and amazingly art-directed empires ever. And they are literally taken to the Wicked Witch. It really feels like I hadn't thought of it before until this. It feels like a Wizard of Oz scenario. That colour change, the palette change, and everything.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that, Scott, but that's brilliant. I mean, there's a paper to be written there for sure. It's definitely that kind of, and that also kind of colors, what happens as kind of like surreal fantasy. But then there's that odd line about, like, you're journeying out into space without knowing what wonder or what awaits you there, which feels like a line out of like 2001 or some like, serious sci-fi movie or something. And that always cracks me up. Like, you foolish humans, you've been going into outer space and you didn't know that Ming the Merciless is out there.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there are moments, and I'm sure you'll probably find that was probably ad-libbed, but there are moments in this that are really like you go, that's a really good point. Yeah, he says, you feeble humans, you fling yourself into space not knowing what awaits you, sort of thing. And you do think that's quite a deep line, it's quite threatening. But then, like, he just tops it with an evil cackle, and you're like, oh, there it is. There's the moustache twirling again. I mean, what's so weird to me is that, I mean, I don't think that, what I've seen of the Raymond comics are not camp like this. I mean, they're old-fashioned, and they're planetary fiction, but
and Raymond's art style, what I love about it is that it's so realistic.
Yes.
It seems in such contrast to what we're seeing. And, I'm really interested in kind of, retrofuturism and this kind of the exuberance of some of the sci-fi of earlier decades where it's like, why wouldn't there be people living on the moon? Why wouldn't there be, a planetary society like this? That it seemed a little more realistic at the time. And I don't know if by 1980 it was like, yeah, we can't take this stuff seriously, or what was going on there.
I do think that's the case. I think this is a film out of time. Like I say, this is a film that if this had been made, and obviously you probably wouldn't have got the production and all that kind of thing, but if this was made between, 1955 and about 1962, 63, I think this would have been held, and it would probably have had a slightly different tone, but it would have been held as a more serious, even as it looks and everything. I think it would have been taken as a bit more of one of those B-movie, sci-fi films. Probably close to like Forbidden Planet or one of those. I do seriously think this is a film out of time.
Yeah, and I love that sort of older school sci-fi, and I think you're exactly right. I mean, and that's kind of, it's also sort of like at that juncture point where, it's post Star Wars, but Star Wars is really science fantasy. I mean, it's not, it's not serious science fiction. I hate to say, but you can see somebody kind of saying like, well, we can't really do this realistically. Those kids, they just like the fantasy elements anyway. We can't have lightsabers, but we can have the most flamboyant, wonderful costuming ever.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's sort of where it goes, isn't it? They were like, well, what can we do? What do we want to do? I have to admit, though, I can't see who they are on the credit, but whoever did the art design, the art direction on this, they went to town, and I think it's amazing that they did. I mean, the sets in this, Ming's throne room, and the spaceship designs, and Baron's homeworld, Voltan's floating sort of palace, all of it. The design is incredible and detailed and so bold that it's incredible. I think it's fantastic. I mean, I was a bit taken aback. I hadn't remembered how. I remember it being colourful, but not how much was actually put into the design of all these. But not just the design of the sets. I mean, the one thing that I found incredible was each of the cultures have got definition. You can tell who's a Hawkman. You can tell who is one of the tree people, or from Arborea. You can tell. All those different races have got definite cultural looks, and they seem consistent. I think it's incredible that they've managed to keep that whilst this other chaos is going on.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember. That's a good point about the different factions, the different cultures. I do remember the set design and the costume design, but it's amazing to me how often what they do in it is have Flash play a football game.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? You've got such an awesome set and everybody's assembled. Is that what you want to do?
There are a couple of things about that scene. I love that scene. I think it makes me smile so much. It's incredible. But the fact that they're all gathered around, he breaks free. He gets broken. He gets beaten in a fight until he gets tossed. I think an egg, basically, and he turns it into a football match. I love the fact that the guards that he goes against are basically wearing. I'm just looking at a picture of them. They are wearing glitter American football pads, they are and helmets. Yes. It's such a good setup. Because then at the end of it, Clytus, the General Clytus brings them all in and says, he appears to be playing some sort of primitive game. Go and beat him. But at no point does anyone pull out a gun and just shoot him.
Yes, or even I mean, there's that weird like glove gun at the beginning when they capture him.
Yeah.
You know, where did that come from? I mean, that's crazy, but you know, I don't remember it being reused. Yeah, I mean, it's very strange. And then you have the minions kind of clearly know football formation.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you know, it's a primitive Earth game, but they know the rules.
Yeah. I think it's wonderful. Things like that are what make this film, like you say, it just stands out as it's incredibly silly, it's incredibly campy, but it really is. And like the fact that like throughout it, you've got Brian Blessed just stood at the sidelines. He trips one of them up, then he hits him over the head with his thing. Just sort of like the look on his face and stuff, and the way he plays it is so, again, pitch perfect. The cast in this, like, you know, whatever the chaos was that was going on, I think they really do a great job.
Yeah, well, he steals the show for me with the sort of, I think he ends up knocking like 3 different guards on the head.
Yeah.
And then later he's so resistant to opposing Ming, but, you know, like we've just watched the execution of somebody. He's taking his life in his hands by knocking these guards out. But it doesn't really make sense, but it's just such a charming, just sort of cut back to Blessed's guilty look, or, you know, mischievous little look on his face.
And that's exactly what I mean. He is like a sort of like he's like a little schoolboy that's just almost been caught out. That he's almost like, oh, no, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. But his face is covered in chocolate. You know, it's. Yeah,
he seemed to be playing it off as like, oh, an accident.
Yes.
I hit this guy on the head again. You know.
Yeah, he's fantastic in it. He is, and he's such a good. Apparently, like I say in the interview, he admitted that he was a big fan of the Flash Gordon serials and the comics, and Voltan was his favourite character. So this was almost like, for him, was getting to play the character he played as a boy. So I think that's why he's enjoying it so much.
Yeah, it's so awesome. I always love when, you know, when you hear, like, you know, one of the actors playing Doctor Who grew up and they were a fan, and, you know, you can really tell that, you know, they enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, don't you think that Timothy Dalton plays it more straight?
Oh, Timothy Dalton's in a he's the only one, I would say. Like, so you've got, like, everybody else, whether it's, you know, like Sam Jones or Max von Sydow, or like you say, or Brian Blessed, or even Richard O'Brien as, you know, Baron's sort of sidekick, they all know they're in this camp 60s, you know, Barbarella kind of thing. I think they all get it. Timothy Dalton clearly doesn't. I think he thinks he's in some sort of I don't know if he's auditioning for Bond early or what. Yeah, he's slightly in a different film.
He thinks he's like in Dune or something, you know.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, he's sort of the aberration in that cast where but then he does that. I think that's, you know, I think when I've watched him in other things, it's not really till a lot later in his career that I think he learned to take himself less serious. I always get the feeling he was that very serious Shakespearean actor. Even when you watch his Bond films, it's a very dark Bond. It's quite a it's a serious sort of affair.
Yeah, and I quite like I think his Bond films are underrated.
Oh, I agree. I really do. I think what's the one? Not the first. Living Daylights. I think Living Daylights is really underrated. I think it's really good.
Well, people give all the credit to the new ones for infusing realism, but you know, the Dalton films were of a different tone. You know, clearly an attempt to take Bond more realistic, which fits Dalton's kind of, you know, stentorious sort of Shakespearean demeanor.
Yes, yeah, and I think he was a definite. He was the sort of the antidote to the later Roger Moore ones, I think, at the time. I think it's just a shame he didn't get to stretch his legs on any more. I think he had some more in him that would have been good.
Oh yeah, I agree.
But you know, we've talked about it being camp, and we've talked about so you know, the campness of it all and that few things. But there's something in this film that, again, in this watching, really, it hadn't landed with me previously. And as I said before, like, I thought about letting my daughter watch this, and there was a couple of things that really started to sort of think, I'm not sure, would she understand this, or would it flow ahead? But this has got some real overtly sexual connotations in multiple scenes that I hadn't either picked up or I'd missed or I'd just forgotten about. I don't know, but yeah, this gets there's some real suggestive stuff. Let's put it that way.
Well, I guess I kind of like that stuff.
It's interesting.
But, you're thinking of like the Ming suggesting that Flash can rule Earth and breed with his daughter. There's a lot of stuff with Ming's daughter like that.
Oh yeah, Ming's daughter's the interesting one, because I mean the point. There's a couple of lines that always stand out to me. Have stood out to me in this viewing. When Ming uses his ring on Dale Arden when they're first brought to the throne room, and she sort of reacts in a sort of like erotic kind of way, doing some sort of erotic dance or thing. And Clytus says, "Interesting. She's almost as good as your daughter."
Yes.
And Ming agrees, and I'm a bit like, that mainly make me feel awkward. I was like, oh, that's a little, I'm not sure how I feel about that. And the other line, really,
well, it's almost like they forgot that she's his daughter momentarily.
Yes, exactly, and it's almost and then the other line that really, and especially in the modern climate, felt really uncomfortable, is when again Dale Arden is in the harem, and they give her some alcohol type drink, and the girl says to her, he says, will this make me forget? And she says, no, it won't make you forget, but it'll make you not mind remembering. Mm-hmm. Which again is, I was a bit like, oh, that's not good.
Yeah, that's definitely a pretty rapey scene.
Yes.
Sort of harem-like, but it does seem kind of like they're intentionally, skirting the limit there.
Oh, yeah. What rating is this in America, out of curiosity?
I don't know. I assume it seems PG to me.
Yes, I was saying it's a PG here, so I was curious if there was a variant in the rating.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. But there's probably a fan-made uncut version that gets more explicit on these points.
Well, of course, there was there is the alternative versions they've made. That there was we're discussing Flash Gordon, but of course there are Flesh Gordon, and that got a sequel. So maybe there is something to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely that whole kind of planetary fiction subgenre was so infused with sex. I mean, it was so infused with the white masculine man who goes to the foreign planet, typically falls in love with an alien girl. She can't resist him. He leads the rebellion, or he has that kind of American can-do attitude, or what bravado, or whatever that is, and ignites a rebellion, or beats the monster and wins the girl, and she's kind of there as a prize. And I feel like, I mean, this movie definitely uses that, but it seems to get out of that at least a little. I mean, those two women have a little more agency, but they're definitely still just sort of, prize figures.
Oh yeah, well, I agree, and I do think that there is some agency. Like Dale Arden isn't just a damsel in distress. I mean, she ends up being the damsel in the distress at the end, but she clearly has enough fight in her and an intelligence in her to escape and to stand up for herself. So like I say, she's quite good. But even Aura, Princess Aura, like, she's not just like a figure of sex. or I mean, she clearly uses it. Like she's a clearly very intelligent manipulator.
Yes.
Like throughout the film, you see that she's actually got an awful lot of control within the Empire, whether it be Prince Baron, Timothy Dalton. She brings flashback, the Chief Doctor. Like she's even sleeping with him in order to control him. There's this other suggestion that she's got her own palace somewhere, that she's got this place, and she's using sex as a tool in order to gain control and power within the Empire on the secret. So it's not as if she's just used for eroticism. Like it's her. She is using her feminine wiles, as it were, as a tool and everything. It's quite interesting that she's not ever played to be. I don't want to say stupid, but she is in control.
Oh yeah. Well, and the contrast between her and Dale as sort of like one woman who embraces, perhaps because of the backstabbing, nature of this fascistic court, her sexual power, and then Dale is a woman who is less sexual or is more, comes from a different environment in which she, presumably hasn't had to do that.
Yeah, and I'm interested as a contrast. I'm trying to think that, but the interesting thing is that despite all of her manipulations and the clear thing that she throughout the first two acts lies, cheats, manipulates to get to survive and to get what she wants. For her to then say that she's had a change, she says to Prince Baron, "I've had a change of heart," and all this other stuff, and they all believe her again. I was just like, oh, no one learns in this film. And she survives to the end, and I was a bit like, wow, fair play. You've survived all this and come through, with the hero team. Yeah.
Although, I mean, it seems as if she's, like, they kind of set up a love triangle, and then, get away from that at the end, to sort of, everybody winds up with somebody kind of happy ending going on.
Definitely. Well, they definitely feel that they write themselves into a couple of corners and they just sort of drop things. They're a bit like, oh, we won't acknowledge that. Or like you say, they just sort of work out of them pretty quickly and like, oh, no, that wasn't really what we were meant, and move away from it. And I wonder if that was a situation from the on-set rewrites that were happening.
Yeah, I wonder that too, and I wonder, like, was there any version in which Flash and Dale go home? Is this set up for, a sequel? Obviously, there's, like, the end with Ming's ring and the question mark, and, it does seem strange that everything is wrapped up so neatly in a bow, and yet they don't go home.
Well, again, in the interview also, Brian Blessed said he was signed for 3 films. So I would assume at least the primary cast would have been signed for similar. So there was clearly thoughts of a sequel, of a follow-on. They were thinking 2 more, really. So they were thinking ahead. I do think there was supposed to be further adventures of Flash Gordon, in this world, and they would have brought back Ming or something, or I don't know. But I mean, does Flash have any other enemies, or is it always Ming?
Every story I've ever read is always Ming. It's like Dan Dare, where get over it already. That's my impression.
Yeah, so there could have been more. They could have done something. It's just I'd say unfortunately it wasn't a sufficient success to gain a sequel, but I think it's one of those again though. But if because it doesn't have a sequel, does that help its cult status as well?
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. Quite possibly. If it had a sequel that didn't have Queen and was a little more lower budget and did not look good and made some bad choices, you could see that kind of hurting the reputation. On the other hand, I mean, a sequel would have kept it in the minds of people, and maybe prevented you and my experience of kind of wondering, what am I looking at? What is this?
Yeah, it's. I mean, like I said, this came out in 1980, and there does seem to be this sort of in the. It is in the early 80s. There's a couple of films that come out of this period that you do think have missed their mark by at least a decade, and I enjoy them both. I mean, there's this film, but also watching this, I thought about the Harryhausen Clash of the Titans that came out in 1981. And I remember watching that as a kid and lumping it very much in with Jason and the Argonauts and Sinbad, the Sinbad films and all those. And then it wasn't until I learned later on that I'm like, oh no, there's a vast, there's years between those. And you think, Clash of the Titans, this film came out the same year as Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right. Oh yeah.
It really starts to hit home. I think there was just a couple of films then. I think this falls into it that were just films out of time. And whilst I really enjoy Clash of the Titans, it doesn't stand up as Clash of the Titans doesn't stand up to the test of time because it comes across as very much a sort of sword and sandals kind of fantasy film.
Yeah.
Very buggered, but this does stand the test of time because it's so different.
Yeah, I mean, and even though we have talked about how it's hard to place whether it's a parody or the tone, how much of it is a fantasy. It does seem so uniquely itself and so committed to whatever acid trip it's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, even when you're watching in the final battle, like the terrible sort of green screen stuff. I remember at one point the Hawkmen are sort of just flying in a line, and one of them gets shot and just falls out, and it looks like for all the world like a carnival or something where you've got like ducks, and one of them is shot. It's so bad, but it is so committed to its vision, and I think that there's something to be said for that.
Oh, I agree, and I think because it does it like you say wholeheartedly, it embraces. It never shies away from it. I think is part of its charm and part of why I think I enjoy it so much. It holds up in that fashion of the absurdity of it. And I think there's others.
I have to ask: am I the only one who identifies with Ming? Who I identify myself I kind of root for Flash Gordon, but I root for him as I forget that he's a football player who crashed and happened into a rocket ship and ran some guy over when he crashed, who's never mentioned again. I do start to root for him, but I kind of like Ming.
Oh, yeah.
He's so evil, but Max von Sydow is so great. And, I mean, if this is an authoritarian sort of fascistic state, he plays it for the hilt. And I find myself wondering, he's got to fuse together all these different cultures, I mean, he's got a tough job. He's, united these people through force, and he's not a good guy, but, I do find myself kind of identifying with him at times.
Oh, no, they obviously have to make some sort of offering, to Ming on a regular basis, whether it's annual or monthly or whatever, and that's part of the throne, the throne room. But
right.
But none of them seem poor.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not like they're scraping and scrimping. I mean, at one point, like I say, that there's the African, weirdly, and it sounds weird, but like the African nation in space that says due to hard times we can offer nothing but our loyalty.
Yes.
and you think, okay, well, you've had some hard times, but you're still wearing an awful lot of gold, so I can't really think that you're having that much of a hard time.
Well, and even when Ming orders that guy to kill himself, to fall on his sword, that guy betrays Ming, and so Ming was kind of right to doubt his loyalty. I mean, if Ming just has him killed, you'd think, oh boy, what a terrible guy. But Ming seems to know this is all an act. You're pretending to have this great fealty that you clearly don't. Let's test that, shall we?
Yeah.
There's an intelligence in that that's at least admirable, even if he's a dictator.
Well, you have a really good point, because the thing that's just struck me that I hadn't thought about till you raised this is, well, what's the alternative? Because if you took Ming away, it's clear that Prince Baron and Voltan would be at war.
Yes.
So you'd have warring factions. That's all you'd end up having. So, yeah, you're right. Actually, it's like, well, he's unified. He's conquered and unified these cultures and these nations, and he probably quite heavily taxes them and all this other stuff. But they don't ever really show him. He's he's evil because he twirls his mustache and he does other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
But other than that, you never really see how he came to be like the conqueror of all these worlds. Did he inherit them? Did he conquer them?
Well, you make a good point, and if they did Disney did that Wizard of Oz prequel, we could get a Ming the Merciless origin story. I mean, they're all the rage, so stay tuned for Ming the Merciless, sort of rising from nothing to fuse together these factions.
Well, is it? Have you seen Maleficent? The Angelina Jolie. Not. It's all right, but the point of it is that you find out that sort of the evil witch, sorceress, whatever you want to call it, from Sleeping Beauty, like what you see in Sleeping Beauty is retaliation for something that the king did to this, to the forest and to these other things. Like there's a whole chunk of story missing that this film fills in, and you start to go, "All right, yeah, no, I see why you're pissed off. Like I get it." And so you do sort of like your allegiance starts to be tested a bit. But I can imagine a film of almost like a Breaking Bad scenario where someone he's gone out with the bestest of intentions to stop these factions from killing each other, and the ongoing feuding and fighting, and it's terrible. So he tries to bring them together, but then when he gains power, he starts to get corrupted by that power. So I think there's a really interesting story there to tell. Actually, like it could be like.
I do too. And he seems to have a kind of like classic Roman attitude of what I really demand. Yeah, there's some tribute, there's some taxes, but what I really demand is loyalty to me.
Yeah.
He doesn't go into, it's like the Romans would conquer somebody in the traditional mode. Of course, it depends who's the provisional governor, but in the traditional mode, they'd say, okay, keep your gods. You can keep your king. That's all fine. You just have to be Roman now and swear allegiance to the emperor, and we're going to have a bigger economic system. And Ming does, he's clearly not, like, influencing their cultures. He's not saying, like, you can't worship the hawk god or whatever's going on there.
Well, that's a really good point, because there's a moment in this when they start to, where they try to wipe Dr. Zarkov's mind. Mm-hmm. And they go back, and he's obviously got a Jewish ancestry, and they go back through his childhood, and then weirdly, like through I suppose it's 1980. No, it must be through his parents, thing, and they go through this whole thing.
Weird.
Yeah, it goes beyond. It's very bizarre, but it goes back into, and it covers the rise of the Nazi Party. It sort of covers this idea of the Holocaust in a very sort of like subverted way, and then Hitler pops up, and they say, "Oh, he definitely had potential." And so there is the they're trying to give that the undertone of like the Ming is Hitler and here's his secret police. They refer to them as the Mongo secret police, and it's trying to have, like I say, that fascist state, but there's never any recognition. And again, you don't know the pre-story, but there's never any recognition of genocide or cultural appropriation. It's all very much like no, you be the Hawkmen, you be the tree people, you be whoever, but you're just loyal to me. You just pay me taxes, and that's how I live, sort of thing. Yeah,
right.
It is.
That seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
My favorite thing about the Mind Wipe is the use of black and white footage.
Yes.
Like black and white newsreel footage. My memories are occasionally in black and white.
That's one of my favorite cliches that ever appear in films. Is that thing of like whenever you see they sort of show the things of like flashing through history, and there's always something where like they couldn't have been there to see it, but they'll flash up some newsreel to show it, and it's always a very similar one of Hitler or World War II, and so it's a definite trope.
But the Hitler thing, while it's kind of played as a joke, I mean, it does kind of complicate the assumption that Earth is all good and Mongo is all bad. Obviously, there's nothing. Like, there's no social injustice on Earth. I mean, a scientist can just build a rocket ship and nobody really cares. There's a vortex swirling in space, apparently. I mean, just outside of Earth. I mean, nobody cares. I mean, but Earth is a fine place. There's, it just is filled with happy, fun football players and things like that. And that seems really untrue. I mean, is Earth that much better?
No, and that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, this is the question again of I say it's the Wizard of Oz reality with all the colourful stuff. Like you end up in this fantasy world where they do get to win. They get to win, and everyone leads off hand in hand. Whether it be with a heart or a brain or some courage. It's you get Barin as the ruler, you get Voltan as the general of the armies, and no one seems to acknowledge the other cultures. But they're all of a sudden they're like, and we will live hand in hand and help each other, and it's like they've come through it because of this blonde American football player. But yeah, it seems like and here's what you can achieve, and it does feel very much like it's a nice fantasy world that you can go to if you go through this swirling vortex, whether it be a whether it be a hurricane, tornado, or an imperial vortex in space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does have that fantasy element, but that reading seems to only accentuate the idea that Flash has not managed to unite opposition movements on Earth.
No.
This is still the height of the Cold War.
Yeah.
People feared nuclear Armageddon at this point. I mean, it wasn't at the height of the 1950s with, the phony missile gaps and all of that. But I mean, nuclear Armageddon was still a very real thing. Clearly, Flash has not accomplished that on Earth, or we assume so.
Yeah, I want to see the sequel where when he comes back and they take him to the UN. I want to see how he handles that. I'm not sure he can handle that with a football match, and he'll
give him a speech about just unite against these enemies, and it just falls on deaf ears. Like, I clearly belong on Mongo.
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's a simplification. That's what it was. The more I say, I mean, there's clearly going to be someone. I think you say there's a paper to write there, and I think there is someone a bit more, probably a bit more intellectual and knowledgeable than me to write it. But I think really is something to search there. This idea of it being the Wizard of Oz story of the simplistic fantasy world where you can achieve good over evil, and with very few complications of border disputes or trade routes or whatever. I mean, that was the problem with Star Wars, wasn't it? Really, it's the first trilogy is very much, as you said, that space fantasy. There's good versus evil, and yeah, they introduce some grey in the middle, but then they do the prequels and they introduce an entire bloody political system that then you start to it starts to lose that fantasy element, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that this is something that has always bothered me both about Star Wars and about Flash Gordon that I've never quite put my finger on. Obviously, like in Star Wars, I always thought, the Empire does some bad things, but it's kind of the only game in town.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's what bugs the hell out of me about the sequel movies, which I guess I overall like, is, you overthrew the Empire. You're the government now. Why did you do none of that and apparently let a new empire rise, that's like the rebel empire or something? You overthrow the king, now you're the king. You've got to do some galactic administration and stuff. And I think it's exactly that kind of just pure good guys and pure bad guys. Because we both saw Flash Gordon late, if you think this was made in 1980, I mean, I guess, Thatcher's already prime minister, but Reagan hasn't come to power yet. I mean, we're in the kind of like dark period of the late Carter years when, I like Carter, but, things weren't going great. And America had kind of like lost some of its bravado, its confidence, and here comes this idiot actor saying, we're going to make America great again, basically. But by the time I watched Flash Gordon, I mean, we're in a very different era in which, like, Gorbachev had higher approval ratings than Ronald Reagan did.
Yeah.
By that point, the idea, like the concept of the evil empire was something that a warmonger would say that was, not productive. This kind of black and white view was not productive. And in many ways, Gorbachev was, pushing his country toward peace faster than Reagan was. And Reagan had to get caught up on that. And so in that context, Ming just being the bad guy and here's this, American cowboy bravado coming in, struck me as like, I'm rooting for the wrong side. This is like a little bit like that John Wayne Vietnam movie where, you just think, really?
Yeah. It's true. It feels like it's a fairy tale, isn't it? This is a tale for children. It's that thing of like good will win. The end. And they all lived happily ever after. And so you do wonder what the sequel would be and whatever there could be.
Can you imagine a Dark Empire Strikes Back like sequel?
Yeah, that's the one I want. And it ends with Flash losing his hand, and yeah, that'd be amazing. Actually, I don't know. I can. The thing is, I see why this film. Again, when you look at the era in which it was released and the other films that were coming out around this time that were doing well, I can see why this didn't do well. If you know what I mean? It's that thing of, like you say, that by 1980 there was a definite swing in, punk was in, and it was a bit more militant, and we'd had Star Wars, which had shown a sort of a scratched up, worn in kind of space, and so to have this sort of polished campy space opera, I can see why it didn't succeed. I mean, it's a shame it didn't get the sequel, but I can see when I watch this, I can see also why other films haven't succeeded in other eras. And again, that sort of the good versus evil, kind of thing. It's a bit like John Carter when that was released.
Yeah.
I actually really enjoyed that film.
Yeah.
Disney went through a spate of doing this sort of quite they tried to make these quite simplistic early period heroes. I mean, they did both the Lone Ranger and John Carter.
Right.
And the films themselves aren't terrible. I actually quite enjoy both
I
of
agree.
them. But it's clear that they don't know how to add anything in to make them a bit more substantial without diluting the characters. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and I think I mean, obviously John Carter is probably the closest to Flash Gordon, and I mean, it is planetary romance, and yeah, I mean, and I don't know unless you go camp, how you do that and sell that. It's tough because it's so shot through with sort of imperialist attitudes and good guys and bad guys, and you can't really do that. Not to mention the woman is the trophy figure that the good guy gets. I mean, I don't know how you quite do that today.
I know exactly how you do it today. It was called Thor Ragnarok. That's all I
still haven't seen that.
Have you not seen it?
No. I don't. I literally haven't seen any Marvel movies after Civil War.
Oh, okay.
I'm just out. I'm gonna get caught up, but I'm so bored with them.
They do. Well, this was the thing, and I think they realised they after Civil War. I think there's a definite loosening of the reins to the directors. And I think the biggest loosening was to Taika Waititi with Thor Ragnarok, and he is, and it has tonal problems. If I'm perfectly honest, there are some elements that bother me. It's not a perfect film by a long shot, but it fully embraces its humour and its campness. In a sense, It's like, so what is Thor? Right, well, Thor's this sort of like almost he's been around for thousands of years. He's still arrogant despite being worthy. He's basically a bro, like he's a jock bro.
Yeah.
So what do you do with him then? Well, you take him out of that and you make him the fool sort of thing, and that's exactly what they do. And there's just Thor Ragnarok places him in a gladiatorial arena in which he has to prove himself without Mjolnir, and then he has to help an uprising and unify an army and then take on Ragnarok. And the more I was watching Flash Gordon, I was like, this is what Marvel did. They've just Thor 3 is it's got the neon, it's got they use the music, everything is there. And but again, they embraced it and they went with it, and everyone, that Thor Ragnarok got huge kudos, like both critical and fan went mad for it. And I'm wondering, like, so that's how you do it, that's it. Like, I almost wanted to say, like, watching Flash Gordon is almost like, anyone who likes Thor Ragnarok, go watch Flash Gordon, because it doesn't have the budget, but seriously, it's just as fun.
Yeah.
And again, like when you see that when they tried to do with Thor 1 and 2, like you say, it doesn't work. That interplanetary stuff, or interdimensional, whatever you want to call it, if you take it too serious,
right,
it feels a bit pretentious and a bit.
Oh yeah. But I mean, that's a fantastic point about Thor Ragnarok being, in some ways, Flash Gordon for the new era, and that was exactly my. I mean, I remember the first. I mean, I really hated the first two Thor movies, and I came out of the first one and I thought that was Howard the Duck done as a serious movie.
Yeah. They didn't know how. If anything, I think Howard the Duck's probably a more enjoyable film because it's got stuff in it that's incredibly silly.
Oh yeah.
But it's true, they didn't know what to do with Thor because they'd had the other heroes. Your Captain America, you do the sort of like the pulpy adventure film, and then you got for Iron Man, you do the techno adventure kind of film, but yeah, they did not know what to do with Thor until they hit on this sort of like, you know, the Guardians of the Galaxy style. Yeah, we just go all out, you know,
Right.
and it works better because it's space, it's huge. Why not go all out? Yeah, it doesn't have to be worldly. Yeah.
Well, you've successfully sold me on Thor Ragnarok, which I didn't think was possible.
Yeah, it's definitely worth seeing. It's worth a watch. If you can rent it from somewhere, I definitely recommend it. Just to watch it and see it in the context of what you've seen before, in the films. And much like, as I say, Brian Blessed is having the time of his life, ad-libbing and doing whatever he wants to be. Appears in Flash Gordon. Chris Hemsworth has got great comedy timing and puts it to great use in Thor Ragnarok. So, I definitely recommend it.
You know, one of the things that always occurs to me as far as like updating the kind of story is I remember very fondly, I'm a huge fan of the Adam Strange Prestige format miniseries that was released sort of late 80s, maybe like 89, 90. And it was kind of spun out of Alan Moore Swamp Thing, which kind of hinted at everything Adam Strange knows is wrong. And it was super dark. It was, you know, like a revisionist version of a planetary romance where, you know, it's no coincidence that Adam Strange went to the planet Rand. You know, he was selected, and he's there to be like a breeding stock, and all of these adventures are just kind of set up for him to boost his masculine ego and make them think that they need him for something other than, you know, breeding stock because they're dying out. And I still love that. I mean, it's dark as hell. I mean, if they did a version of Flash Gordon like that, people would think it was too dark and too Batman v Superman, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, that kind of disillusioned me of a lot of the tropes of planetary romance. You know, the sort of coincidental going to an alien planet and needing to be the hero and all of that. I think it kind of inoculated me against some of that, although I still find the, you know, those tropes work.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. I think, is it because the tropes, and this thing with these, it's like cliches, isn't it? They're there for a reason because they form in many cases sort of like the strongest part of it. But so there is, I've not seen the Adam Strange one. I'll have to check that out. But so I'm trying to think if there's anything else, you know, where they have tried to do that. I mean, the thing is, in this day and age, you have got. You know, it's not so much interplanetary romance, but you have these space dramas that they've got, like The Expanse, and I'm trying to think of some others where they've done them a bit more. You know, they've taken them dead serious, and even like, you know, the most recent, you know, Star Trek Discovery, and that's what they've given them a different tone, a slightly darker, slightly sort of, you know, could you do that with Flash Gordon? But would you have to change the structure? Could he still be the hero, or would you need him to, like you say, to play a different role in it all?
Yeah, it's so tough. I mean, you know, because I can envision what that would look like, but I don't think anyone but me would like it. You know, I mean, the sort of dark Flash Gordon where, you know, I'm one man, what difference can I make? You know, I mean, that's not Flash Gordon. You know, and sort of deconstructing all those tropes. I mean, I would dig it, but I can't imagine selling that as a summer blockbuster.
I mean, I think there's other ways of doing it. I mean, like you say, there's... I mean, you know, the idea of maybe catching up with a Flash that's older and he's been on Mongo for a couple of years, you know, decade maybe, and he rides on a wave of celebrity thinking he's this great hero. But what he actually finds out is for this past decade, everything, all these adventures and everything he's been on has actually been an interplanetary form of entertainment. And it's almost been like some sort of like twisted reality TV show that he didn't know about. Like a Mojo World kind of scenario. And like I said, I wonder what that effect would then have on him, that he actually finds out that none of it was ever real, and this wave of celebrity is more about his legit, he's more the fact that he's a TV star than that he's been kept away from than an actual hero.
Did you read Mark Miller's Starlight?
No, I didn't. It's one of those I keep slipping from. I should read it. Is it good?
Yeah, I quite like it. But it takes as its premise a kind of Flash Gordon or Adam Strange sort of planetary romance figure who has been on Earth for a while and basically put all that behind him. He's really old. It's a kind of like Dark Knight Returns sort of. He's old now, but he's been away from it. And in the meantime, the Ming character has conquered everything, and he goes back as an old man and sort of rediscovers. But it's played straight. It's not a dark dystopian thing. Yeah. It is kind of updated tonally, but he goes back and everything works out. But he kind of rediscovers that joy of adventuring. And I could see, that in a kind of like Tomorrowland kind of way of that kind of, which I really dig, that kind of like way in which instead of revising the genre in ways that subtract from, its original appeal, you kind of acknowledge the times past, acknowledge that some of these tropes don't work anymore. You were young and you thought, you freed us all from Ming, but in the aftermath, things didn't go so well. We're still glad you came. We still love you, but,
didn't quite work
maybe
out.
Maybe it wasn't, maybe overthrowing Ming doesn't mean we all still get along.
Yeah.
And maybe we're right back into Civil War,
I wonder. I mean, the thing like you say about these characters, and there's always talk of certain golden age characters being brought back for whatever purpose, and not just in comics. But I wonder how that could it be done, and I think it can be done. Like I say, I think John Carter was a bit of a misfire. I enjoy it, but I understand why it didn't work for the wider audiences. But then I wonder, could you update and do a Doc Savage? Could you update and, do, like, The Shadow? Or could you actually make John Carter work? Or, I mean, another example, actually, I suppose, is the Tarzan film that came out a couple of years ago that was a very straightforward, Tarzan adventure, which it looked great. It had several interesting set pieces, but overall was incredibly bland.
Yes.
So, are those characters done and dusted? Or you say, can they be... Is there a way of reinvigorating some of that adventure?
Well, I gotta believe it can be done. I mean, I think that, we still like adventure stories. I mean, and in some ways, the current Hollywood audience is more conditioned to... one fight scene after another, and just kind of, action for its own sake, and not thinking too much about the plot. So, I mean, that might work, in your advantage, but I think that there's no way that you can update something like that and not acknowledge some of the ways in which those tropes have aged. Even if it's in a winky way, the sort of... it's like you mentioned, the sort of Guardians of the Galaxy thing. I mean, there's no way that was supposed to, that you would think that would work on screen. And yet, you have the sort of winky stuff, and, I think you can do it. I've got to believe it can be done, but I don't know that you can just present a sort of, American, I mean, even today, the fact that he's an American football player and he's white brings up, the whole protest movement with Kaepernick and everything.
Yeah.
It's like, well, he's a football player. Does he kneel for the anthem or not? What does he think about this? I mean, we're just in such a different era.
Yeah.
So I think you have to acknowledge these things. I don't think you can. I mean, I think one of the mistakes of a lot of these updates make is that they either don't want to acknowledge those things at all and just play it straight, or they want to acknowledge them and turn it into something dark and, so subverting of its tropes that it's not really the same story anymore.
No, I think you're right, and I think that's true. And I think there's always a way of doing it, in a new and interesting way. And I think you're right in that with each sort of decade you look at the influence of those old characters, going back to the pulp heroes or the serial characters of sort of like Flash Gordon and Doc Savage and those sorts of characters, they become something else. They become Indiana Jones, or they do become the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Marvel heroes. I mean, no one reads anymore apparently. So yeah, are the Fast and the Furious films and the Marvel films really just the pulp entertainment of today?
I think so.
So that's where those characters. So really, like yeah, I think.
Well, I mean, I always, when I think of Flash Gordon, and I guess I think of the sort of subgenre more generally. I always think about the sort of crisis of masculinity that I think is a real thing. I mean, I think that obviously I don't think that it's as bad a problem as, say, women not having basic rights. I don't think these things are comparable, and I'm not a men's movement guy for that reason. But I do think that we've just had another rash of school shootings over here, and a lot of these violent men are dealing with some of it is just retrograde, not wanting women in the workplace, not wanting wondering where's my trophy Dale figure.
Yeah.
But some of it is sort of if you were raised with a kind of, and maybe this is part of toxic masculinity, but if you were raised in a culture that says to be a man you've got to accomplish great things. I mean, we have a president who says that stuff, right? Says he was genetically superior.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a lot of these messages about masculinity. I think that Flash Gordon is a kind of, if it is a Wizard of Oz fantasy, it's a very gendered fantasy, despite the women not being just two-dimensional, of here's a different world where I can make a difference and be the hero and be respected and carve out some kind, through masculine force and optimism, some kind of status for myself, in which I can have that masculine adventure that is so separate, that is divorced from the world of the cubicle.
It is. It's truly a male fantasy, isn't it? To go off and to be the hero in your own story, and to win the girl and to be adored for it. So yeah, I suppose and there are so many of those. In all, I mean, it's so prevalent in I was going to say in cinema of this era, but it's prevalent in all cinema, really, isn't it? Because the majority of these are white male characters fulfilling the hero fantasy.
Oh yeah.
So
I mean, I guess I kind of wonder how that Wizard of Oz fantasy, as I think you correctly identified it, sort of fits into if we're talking about Gordon being and how we update Flash Gordon or understand Flash Gordon today, I mean, it's a campy, fun film that, maybe couldn't be made today, maybe was a few years after its time, or also a decade before its time in a weird way.
Yeah.
But then, how, I mean, does it not, is it not also, sort of disturbing in these other ways in which Earth is just fine, and, here's the white guy fantasy, is some version of the Flash Gordon myth living in the mind of, somebody who shoots up a school. I mean, that might be going too far, and that's unfair to put on Flash Gordon, and I'm not trying to say that, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I do. No, I totally.
Male fantasy.
It is, and I think it's it could go one way or the other, that they believe that what they are doing is that taking control of their life and achieving that white male fantasy, whether it be with the gun in their hand or whatever, or it could be the fact that they are just lashing out because they didn't get to fulfill that white male fantasy. They didn't get to fulfill themselves as being the hero in that story, that they came out of a scenario where, for whatever, whether they were bullied at school, or whatever happened to them, whatever is driven them to it. And I'm not saying this counts for all of these individuals, but there's always that few where they've got into the real world, or they've got into a situation where they've gone, yeah, do you know what? This isn't a nice place. I'm not going to become adored, and I'm not going to become a Kardashian or a Kennedy, and so I'm then going to go and take out on this place that kept telling me that everyone could be president if we worked hard enough.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I don't want to excuse or over-sympathize with the villains of these incidents, but I do think that whether we classify it as part of the overall patriarchy or toxic masculinity or whatever term we want to use, especially over here. I mean, American boys are still maybe less so today than a generation ago, but I mean, we are still, told we are special, we are going to amount to something. I mean, if we have supportive parents, if we're white, if we have some privilege, it's definitely shot through with all of that privilege. But Flash Gordon certainly, and a lot of our sort of male action hero kind of figures sort of play into that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I'm just thinking about it, and that masculinity and stuff. It does sit behind a lot of those things. I mean, it's why I think films like Rocky IV are so successful. It's that thing of like, it's ridiculous fun, but to see Rocky win over, towards the end of the Cold War, but to win over the Russian Politburo, you get, yeah, I'm British, and even I'm chanting for him. It's ridiculous. But you got your adrenaline pumping, and these films know how to build. And my wife could watch Rocky IV and sit there in a complete, this is ridiculous sort of scenario. But I'm up on my feet, and it's the same. And you chant for these characters and these heroes, and you do get your masculinity gets brought up into it, I suppose, and they know how to play on that. And it's interesting to see that that you then get up on Monday morning and you go into work, and like you say, you either sit in your cubicle or you go and do your job, and this escapist male fantasies, it's are they still valid, or is it for a smaller audience these days?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got to think that it's for a smaller audience, but I mean, I mean, here again, like the way in which Flash Gordon is a football player. I mean, he's already famous on Earth. That kind of reading of the story and the sort of like Alice in Wonderland kind of I mean, Wizard of Oz kind of, through the looking glass fantasy of Flash Gordon, sort of works better if he's just a schlub going into a cubicle.
Yeah.
I've always been, I guess that's another way in which I'm sort of bothered by, Flash having this background.
Yeah, and it's interesting because one of the little tidbits of information in the material I read from the DVD I've got, the director actually acknowledges, the T-shirt that says Flash on it that he's wearing at the beginning. He was given. He says, he always thought the backstory that he was given it by a fan, and so and he enjoys wearing this thing that a fan has given him. So, like you say, he's already living the white male fantasy. He's like you say, he's adored by fans. He gets to win on it. Put in the work. He trains. He obviously puts in the. If he wins as he's the quarterback as well. So he's not like it's not like he's tight. Flash Gordon tight end or. Flash Gordon running back. No, he's the quarterback. He's the key player in the team. So it's right. He's it's interesting because I think you mentioned Mark Miller before. In his series Wanted, it does play into that. Both in the film slightly different, but in the actual comic series. The character is that he's a schlub that he lives a cubicle life. Only to find out that he's the heir to a lineage of these secret assassins, in this villainous world, and he goes off and he becomes this awesome sort of like character and gets to live out all this sort of crazy shit. It's the same, but like you say, because he comes from a that sort of like mediocrity, it sort of lands more. It with more weight than Flash Gordon, who's going from a 10 to a 10.
yeah, quite. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Going from a 10 to a 10. I mean, when does Flash Gordon really suffer? Even in the movie, even when he faces adversity, he's at least Indiana Jones goes like, you can tell like Indiana Jones is not enjoying half the stuff he goes through. But Flash never, he's perfect. I mean, he never lets, that steely jaw break.
Yeah.
That resolve.
Well, yeah, and there's also because I don't know how long he's been dead for, but they're like he's clearly been executed, and then his body's taken away, and he is revived. But there's like no adverse effects from that at all. It's just sort of like he is technically almost like the Mary Sue kind of character, isn't he? Because everything he does, he is successful at. Like, he never fails.
Yeah, on an unrelated note, I was thinking of like there's that great line by the main Hawkman. I forget his name. Voltar.
Brian Blessed's character, Voltan.
Yeah. Where he says, do you want to live forever?
Yeah.
It's straight out of Starship Troopers. There's definitely a kind of, I mean, like on the positive side, I mean, there's a kind of joy even to the fight scenes in this movie. Even the fight scenes don't get, if Flash doesn't doubt himself, there's debate over like, should we really do this? But once they're committed to it, it's like, this is so much fun, and you see, Blessing is having, like you said, he's having the time of his life, even when he's in mortal danger.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, that's one of the things about this film that like you say, is Ming the better option? Because at the end of it, you have Baron as the leader, and then you have Voltan as your general, who clearly enjoys fighting and war. And I'm thinking, is he the best person to be like in? Who are you going to fight? Or is he just going to start picking fights now to sort of so his Hawkmen can go out into battle and stuff? It's yeah. Oh, yeah, there is the potential for like a dark sequel where it's all gone wrong, and Voltan has turned on him, and there's been an uprising and a military coup. That's what the sequel is. It was a military coup led by Voltan. That's what I think we have.
Yeah. Well, that's what they say, a happy ending is just, you see it in Shakespeare, right? A happy ending is just where you end a story.
Yes.
Because even if everybody gets married and it's all good, they're going to die.
Yeah.
The kingship isn't going to be peaceful and happy forever. And it's real easy to end on that kind of like a New Hope, sort of like medal ceremony. It's all good. Kick up the music and everybody feels like, all right, the bad guy was defeated. But there's always that sort of what next question. And I especially feel it where you have an empire dethroned or, Ming's out of the picture. How is government going to work now? Is there a plan for this?
Yes, that's it. Yeah. It's a really interesting, like you say, it opens up lots of avenues. But to bring it round to the end of that. So if you were to could you give this film a score out of 10 though, as a film, as an entertainment film? Could you give it a score?
Oh, for me, that's such a hard question because it is so bizarre and so uniquely itself. There are ways that, it's so committed to what it's doing that it's a 9 or 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
But, there are ways in which it doesn't know what it's doing, or is uncontrolled, that, it's obviously a lesser film than that. I think it's relatively enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly holds up in that regard. So, yeah, I don't know. I maybe give it a 7.
Yeah,
Split the difference.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
What do you call?
No, I felt the same because I was really sort of like watching it, and it's as I watched it, like the score changes. Because like you say, there's bits where you go, yeah, I think it's really gone off the rails a little bit at this point, and I'm really not sure what they're doing. And then when you get to the sort of the third act, and like you say, everyone's just gung ho and like, yeah, let's just go crazy. I'm in it, and I'm like you say, I'm fully behind them, and it's I'm happy that it's committed to its own ridiculousness. That I do. I think like I couldn't give it like a 9 or a 10 because like you say, there are certain aspects that are just a bit meh. So a 7 I would say is very fair. I think that's pretty much where I landed. And again, I think it can even be depending on what mood I'm in, would nudge that, maybe up to a 7.5 or maybe down to a 6, whatever. But it's definitely an entertaining film that really does deserve its cult status.
Yeah, and it is for sure a kind of pop culture masterpiece. It is what it is. I'm a big fan of like Rocky Horror and some other campy stuff. And I feel like that has part of why I like that is that it has a deeper message behind it. It's over the top, but it gets at stuff that that means a lot to me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But I also think when a film almost sort of completely owns what it is, it's going to find its audience. Because there's somebody looking for that. I think, when you get films that eventually water themselves down or shy away maybe from it, like you say, it becomes a little flatter. And I think that's just...
Yeah,
go on.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think that's my, definitely from the art for art's sake movement forward, you're supposed to judge a work of art based on what it wants to be, not what you want it to be. And so, it's a little unfair of us to be like, well, Flash is too perfect, Well, that's true, but, that's clearly its vision. It doesn't really, divorce from that at all, or diverge from that. So, I'm definitely in that camp, but then there are some things, where I think, boy, this commits to itself, but it doesn't have the charm of a Flash Gordon. You know.
Yeah. Yes.
So.
Yeah, I think you would make a good point. Like you say, it's some films can say you can commit, but you can be off on certain aspects. Or the cast isn't in it, or like, they don't hit the right tone, or again, I think it's a bit like that. There are films that I think of that, like you say, they owned what they were and the world they lived in, and I think they find their own. I think of like the Terry Gilliam films.
Oh yeah.
I think of things like Buckaroo Banzai,
Yeah.
Little Shop of Not Little Shop, even Little Shop of Horrors. But I was thinking of Big Trouble in Big Trouble in Little China. Those films that do just go, oh yeah, we are going to be this. And
yeah. I was also thinking of like early Burton, I mean Pee-wee's Big Adventure or Beetlejuice, or I mean these are just weird visions, but they are eternally consistent and so charming. And Buckaroo Banzai's totally like that.
Yeah, and I think that's like you say, they don't always. These are films that they don't really do well at the cinema because they probably haven't got the widest appeal. But when they find their audience, that audience will love that film and they will commit to it. And I think
for that reason alone, I mean, I think Flash Gordon is a movie that everybody has to see at least once.
Yes. I agree. It's on that must-see list. Okay, listeners, there you have it. Our discussion on Flash Gordon. Said Queen, Brian Blessed, and Ming the Merciless, everything. So, Julian, just come back to it now, sort of, thinking all these times later. Do you still think this film stands up?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that the really interesting thing to me is I don't love this movie, but it's such a touchstone. And I think it's especially a touchstone when we talk about, what qualifies as good and how something can be fun and we enjoy it and it works without it necessarily being smart or really making sense. I mean, nothing on Mongo makes sense. Yes, what about you?
No, the same. It's that thing of it's just sort of one of those films that when I go back to it, it's just like pulp fun. You know what I mean? Like you say, it doesn't make a great deal of sense in many times. The acting's not tremendous across the board, but it is. It's just sort of like it is like a truly sort of like it's the imagination behind it. I always find quite impressive.
Yeah, but, and I think the costumes, some of the special effects. I mean, the funny thing is, it's a few years later than the original Star Wars. It's just 3. It is not as fun. The special effects aren't kind of quite as good, but then it's got that Queen soundtrack, and it's got just some fun, crazy stuff in it. And I think it kind of compares for me to Star Wars, just in my estimation. Yeah.
No, I agree. And this is one of those films that even since this, the review that we sort of that's just been in, I've been back and watched this film, and it is just like daft fun. Like it's so ridiculous, and I think sort of the football scene, the football fight scene in the throne room, just sort of epitomizes like how ridiculous it is, but how much fun it is. Like I love the music in that scene. I love the action. It makes zero sense. But yeah,
I want to be Ming the Merciless. I mean, that's when I apply for a job, I say that is my ideal job. What do you have that's similar to that?
Yeah, I hope it's not one of those scenarios there where they say, "Was it dress for the job you want, not the job you have?" Because I think sort of maintaining those collars and capes and things can be incredibly difficult.
Oh, you're telling me. People look at you weird. When you go out for coffee afterwards, they're like, What cosplayer is that? No, I'm just dressing for the job I want, brother.
That's it. Yeah, this is me in career mode. But one of the things we've said and we're sort of starting to do is now to look at this from a rating point of view. As you said, is it good? Is it good or is it fun? So, but I'm going to ask now, Julian, at 10, what would you give this film?
I give it a 6. So we gave Planet of the Apes, both of us, 7. For me, this is a solid 6. I could see somebody going lower if it doesn't work for them. But for me, this is a solid 6.
I know, seriously, I'm going to go a little higher for me. It's a 6. I was going to go 6.5 because it just ekes over to that sort of thing of the ridiculous, like sublime. Like sometimes you look at this, and I'm like, I can't believe what is on screen. and yet it's so sort of like mesmerizing. Like, you know, watching Hawkmen clearly not fly, but like I'm like, yeah, it looks great. I'm all of it. So yeah, this is a fun film.
I agree, and I think that one of the problems in these ratings is always sort of how do you come up with a rating, right? I mean, is it like, you know, 1 to 10? Do I think this is good and well put together and it makes sense? I mean, it is good and well put together, but it not necessarily in a normal way. And then how do you bias that for how important it is, and also a big thing for me, how much fun it is. So if this is like a 10 to you out of fun, like you just enjoy every minute of it, but you know it's probably like a you know, mid-range sort of as a movie, how do you adjust that rating to account for the fact that you would recommend this and it's an amazing movie in its own right?
No, I agree. I think that's sort of, and to say there are things that are incredibly fun, but there are moments where this does drag, and that, you know, there's some odd choices that are sort of, I would say, you know, sort of some of the politics of it haven't aged well. But no, it's yeah. I think this is a good one, and I'm glad. I say, as we said in the intro, sort of, I'm glad we're getting this discussion out to the listeners. Another cracking film for them to enjoy.
Absolutely,
and I'm hoping, especially for those that are keeping up. You know, for those that are keeping up, you know, we're giving you something special here.
Well, yeah, I think it's important to discuss Flash Gordon, right? And we had this awesome discussion of Flash Gordon, and I don't want to repeat that discussion. It's not, you know, I don't mind covering Flash Gordon again, but we never have that exact same conversation. And you and I know where we stand on it. We've been through that as a people. We've been through that together, Scott.
So we battled through and we survived Flash Gordon. That's so right. Yes. Well, listeners, thank you very much as usual. This is another bonus episode. We've got a couple more sort of stuck up our sleeves that are going to be coming your way soon. So hopefully you're enjoying these before we get into the next season. But in the meantime, thank you very much. And Julian, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. On to the next one.
The streams.